Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Chris Laughton. Yes, I'm the MD of the Solar Design Company. We've got a booth here, somewhere over there on the end wall, so if anything I show interests you, you can always follow it up later. So this is about prediction, but the prediction of the performance of renewables. That's the sort of market we're interested in. I'm going to focus on solar thermal and PV. They're often sort of juggled as a choice to make on a given roof. Let's just give some context to this. UK government, Department of Climate Change, they have this Energy Act, and it created this thing called microgeneration. And that's where you'll sort of find a lot of this sort of renewable energy under the government. They define it as low, zero, or renewable energy. And for those of you who are observant, you might notice there's something missing in that sentence. Perhaps some of you will notice the word carbon is not mentioned in that sentence. However, that's how it's written on the website that I copied from just the other day. So the government's sort of policy, sometimes it feels a bit confusing to me. I'm not really sure if they're trying to reduce carbon or what. But there's a definition of microgeneration anyway. Low, zero, or renewable energy. So it's probably about carbon dioxide. I think that's what motivates a lot of people and policy initially. And it's also about energy that is not centrally generated. So it tends to find it on people's roofs. Solar energy is in fact the source of, well, in effect, all energy at the end of the day. But particularly microgeneration gives us a clear focus of where it all comes from. It's easier to define and split this renewable energy up into two sort of realms, either electricity, there, PV, wind turbines or hydro, and CHP creates electricity, and heat, that being solar thermal, heat pumps, biomass, and yet again CHP, because that does both electric and heat. So if you bear that in mind, it helps sort of understanding the situation with government policy. We believe that to accurately predict renewable energy, and particularly solar energy contribution, you have to do a good site survey. You actually have to go to site and survey it. We think that is the basis of a good sound prediction. Whether it's retrofit or new build, we feel this is an important start. You can do it from from the ground, and in doing this, this is safer than going up a ladder or scaffolding. And if we can find techniques that you can do it from the ground, then a lot of companies are going to find that cheaper to do and are more likely to engage with it. You can also do it from your desktop. You can use the various sort of internet facilities which have aerial or street views. I'm sure you're familiar with the brand name I probably try not to mention, but I think we're all familiar that we can go on the internet and put in an address and actually see it from our desktop. That is used in the trade to try and predict solar energy. Well, we think it's a lot better to actually visit the site because that's the best way to anticipate the shading, which is so critical for solar energy. You can either quantify the loss of shading with a manual method called the percentage of sky reduction. That's a very simple way of assessing shading. But really what we need to do is quantify the loss of radiation, which is a subtle difference, but an important difference between these two techniques. So here's a screenshot. You can see the brand name bottom right-hand corner of our favorite search engine. And they've got a very nice feature where you can put in the postcode, and you can see here on screen a nice red triangle, rectangle around a building. It happens to be a football club. So on this building, you can use an internet tool to measure the length and width of that building. And again, you haven't visited the site yet. You're just doing this from your own computer. You can also work out what direction it's facing. So all done from your desktop. But what you can't easily do is identify the pitch of the roof of that building, and you can't work out the relative heights of the trees nearby. And also what you can't do from these aerial photos very easily is identify the roof features. So although an aerial view is quite useful for an initial study, I think it really benefits to being on site and taking precise measurements. The other thing I should draw your attention to is these aerial views sometimes are out of date. You can actually see a date at the bottom there indicating when it was taken in 2009. Well, that's a couple of years out of date. For all I know, that football pitch is covered in houses now. So we think customer confidence is diminished if we just carry on using desktop studies. We actually think that if you go to site, your customer is actually going to feel a lot more confident about you and your abilities to anticipate the performance. If you're going to use three-dimensional analysis for shading, which is the best way to analyze the effect of the radiation, the best way to do it is go to site and measure the heights of various features, like those trees that you can see on that photograph. These trees have a very strong effect on any shading on any nearby buildings. So measuring the distance away from the building and the height is quite important. And the modern way to do that now is using laser tool, which will measure up to 200 meters to the nearest millimeter very quickly indeed. Other ways we can now visit site and take accurate measurements is by using what we call a sort of panorama tool, which is basically a camera on a sort of pivot on a tripod. And it will create an image, as you can see on the bottom there, with the sun paths and the risk of shading now clearly quantified. These very quickly and precisely quantify the loss of radiation on that particular site. It also captures it as a permanent record as evidence should later on your customer come and ask you why the system is not performing quite as well as it might have. These devices have integral leveling devices, and they will ultimately, with the software, give you what you need, which is the loss of radiation from that particular site. As you see, quite a complex site with trees and other features and lampposts, which may well interfere with the solar radiation on that site. So this is the kind of result you get on your computer. It's just like a horizon from wrapping around to the back of you from north, east, south, west, and back round to north. And as you see on screen now, I'm drawing a little sort of animation of the capture of the landscape around that particular site. And if you use a sort of higher resolution, you can get even more detail of each feature on the landscape. And that's adding up to quite a loss of the percentage of radiation available to that site. So 3 dimensions is, I suppose, the modern way now to analyze the shading. And you can see here a couple of images in the software we've used to illustrate this. Generally, we recommend measuring objects that are likely to shade where they are within 100 meters of the building. This allows you to, get the accuracy into the software. If it's a hill, like that mountain on the right-hand picture, that's, half a kilometer away, well, we don't have to worry exactly how far that mountain is. We just need to capture it on the image. But anything nearer 100 meters is necessary to bring into the software accurately. So we keep a 2-dimensional background, but we bring in the 3-dimensional objects nearby, such as a tree or a building. And the importance between trees and buildings is that the trees drop their leaves during the winter sometimes. And this is important to anticipate to increase the accuracy. Here in the software now, we can take a picture of a building. We can easily import that using, say, even Bluetooth to transmit the image to your computer. And by adding dimensions using a laser tool, it's possible to now create a framework in the software of what the PV system or the solar thermal system is going to be on that roof. And finally, you can move forward and show the customer what this building is likely to look at with a PV array on the roof. And you can go through various scenarios with the customer, showing them what it looks like. Because appearances are important, and some installations, to my eye, don't look very handsome. And I think it's important to engage the customer early on with whether they're comfortable with whether the renewable energy system is going to look nice on their house. We've now transformed that photograph into 3 dimensions, and it's even more easy now to go through various scenarios with the customer, increasing the size of the array possibly, and they can judge whether that's worthwhile. Here's an example of what can go wrong. Can anyone spot the problem? If you look on the right-hand house, we've got some solar PV modules, and right next to it on the left is a house which is shading it. So we're wondering if this customer was aware of what they're losing out. And I'm going to do a quick calculation for you on screen. To do that, we've brought that into 3 dimensions. Now, if we assume the array is that 1.25 kilowatt, and we assume it's a SAP climate, that's a sort of Sheffield average climate, if that array was absolutely optimal, south-facing, pitched up around sort of 35, 40 degrees, we think that customer would have got that, 1130 kilowatt hours a year. But the reduction is caused partly by it being not in an optimal direction. So straight away, they lose a bit. Well, that's acceptable until you look at the shade. If you bring the shade in, you get a very strong reduction. So they're getting 17.7% loss compared to the optimum for those PV modules. And at current feed-in tariff rates, that's a loss of nearly $2,000 at the end of the 25 years. As long as the customer's aware of that, this is allowable under the MCS scheme. The question is, were they informed of this decision? And we think simulation software helps people make this decision. Possibly this array would be better off in a garden where it might not be shaded. On screen now, it shows you the individual loss of the shading on each module. It's very important on each site to analyze the profile of use. Electrically, this can vary between a house top left and then an office on the bottom right. And you can see in an office is more likely to use electricity during the day. This may well benefit the PV feed-in tariff arrangement better than a house would. So taking that thought forward into an analysis, we can see here if we take a PV system with full feed-in, so no use on site, eventually it does break even. Where it passes through the horizontal axis, that's a break-even point. If we take a house with its typical use of electricity, it's even better because they're making savings on the electricity. But it's the office that actually does best because they're using electricity during the day. And you can see here over 30,000 net present value on that particular array, that theoretical array that we're creating. So analyzing the load profile does matter. You can, in the software, take this information and present it to a customer, showing them complex information in simple form. These graphs, these charts, help get across what would otherwise be quite difficult information to get to explain. And so net present values and rate of return and the payback period, these are things that often are benefited from a graphical representation in the software. Moving the story over to solar thermal, you can see here we've got 2 different profiles for the hot water use, campsite and a ski lodge. Quite a different use of hot water in the day and through the year. And you can see, for example, the campsite uses lots of energy, solar energy in the middle of the year, whereas the ski lodge clearly does not, as you can see on the bottom right-hand chart. So analyzing the load profiles are very important. Oops, sorry, I'm pressing the wrong button. Taking the information from the software, you can do an RHI calculation. We've got an online calculator on our website, and you can calculate the actual returns using the simulation software to create the energy. So let's look now at the campsite. In this case, solar thermal does get a payback. The household, however, a typical household, would not get as good a payback as a campsite. And a ski resort, as you can see, unfortunately, does not even pay for itself. It does not use the energy at the right time of year. So load analysis does matter. So a summary. If you're assessing your technologies for use on particular buildings, be aware that heat and electricity are 2 very different values. Check that the customer is interested in the money. Some are not necessarily. Some are interested in the carbon dioxide benefits. Visit site and establish the conditions and perform an accurate on-site survey. This will lead to the most accurate performance prediction. In particular, we emphasize identifying the load profiles of each building. We also maintain that digitizing the landscape in terms of solar energy is an important step. Using simulation software, it's then possible to compare all these to show the customer. Thank you for listening. These are some of the sort of logos that are associated with our company. And, of course, I can take questions at the end, care of the chairman. Thank you.